Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Elusive Networks webinar, Cyber Deception for Banks and Financial Services. I trust and I hope that wherever you are in the world that you and your family are safe and healthy. Just a few announcements before we begin. My name is Jason Silberman. I'm on the product marketing team at Elusive, but I am not going to be speaking at today's webinar. I'm going to turn things over to Ivan Foreman in just a second. But just a few preliminary announcements. One, today's webinar is being recorded, so everyone will receive a copy of the recording in the next day or two in their inbox, so just keep an eye out for that. Secondly, these webinars are always better when we have more questions from the audience, and we like to keep this, the audience engaged. So the way you can ask questions is in the Q&A tab on the webinar control panel. We will monitor those questions, and we will definitely reserve time at the end of today's session to answer as many as we can. Please ask away. So with all that said, I'm now going to turn things over to Ivan. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar to talk about cyber deception for banks and financial services. The agenda that we're going to go through today is, first of all, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what cybersecurity means specifically in the new normal with the COVID times and what is going on with current events, what we're seeing and how this has changed things between attackers and defenders, specifically relating to advanced attacks on your network. Next, I'll be handing over to my colleague Paminda Sahota, who will be taking you through a use case, specifically talking about insider threats and showing you how someone in a financial organization potentially could be tempted into using various different credentials and information to go through an insider threat use case. Next, what I'll do is I'll take over and I'll talk about Elusive, what we do and how potentially we could help protect against these type of threats. And then lastly, I'll talk about a couple of interesting case studies for existing customers that we have and two specific customers that we've got in Europe and how they use Elusive to protect their different systems. So if we talk about Elusive and what we do, and what we're really focusing on is stopping movement or attacker movement from one part in the network to another machine in the network. And really our premise is always to assume breach and assume that however much money you spend on protecting your network, if an attacker has enough resources and enough time, they're going to find a way to land onto a beachhead in your organization. And the challenge is then always to be able to move laterally from one machine to the next. Now, past type of approaches have always utilized various different types of technology to be able to identify when an attacker is on the network. And we have this concept of the attacker only having to be right once and the defender having to be right every single time. And you see on your screen there's this scale of how difficult it is there for a defender to really keep up with what's going on. And what we are basically seeing over the past few months with COVID and everything that's going in the world is that it's actually got even worse. And it's really, really difficult for attackers to be, or really difficult for defenders to be able to keep up with what's going on. And this is based upon a number of different factors. So what am I talking about? What is it that's causing these issues? If I first look at the concept of insiders or insider threats, there are two main issues or two main things that have happened over the coming months, which have basically motivated malicious insiders significantly. The first one is around financial pressure. People are thinking about their future, are thinking about whether or not they've got jobs. There's a lot of countries which have implemented furloughs, so people are still got access to internal systems or working from home, and they don't know if they're actually going to have a job when the furlough is over, or whether or not the company is going to continue to retain them moving forward. So they're thinking in the back of their heads, what does the future hold for me, and am I going to continue at this particular organization? The other thing, which is very, very key, is the environments which they find themselves in. We used to sitting in an office environment, having lots of colleagues next to you, walking past, and today, with the majority of people working from home, it's a much easier now to be able to go through some type of process where you would try to extract some type of confidential information. So the opportunities are a lot higher, and therefore, as a result, it's a lot more likely, if you've got someone who's disenfranchised at the moment and who's thinking about and maybe accessing information that they shouldn't, there's a much higher probability that they would actually want to actually go ahead with this at the moment. The second thing is around from a detection capability. So how, we talk about the two major issues which relate to this. The first one is you've got now incident response people or security people who are used to sitting again together and screens and monitoring all the various different processes. That's no longer available. It's also very, very difficult for individuals to do their job. They're now working from home. They maybe got kids and pets and all sorts of stuff going in the background. They can't interact with their colleagues as they normally do, and it's really, really difficult. So the ability for an organization to now be able to pick up on threats in the network is much lower. And combine that in the fact that a lot of the technology utilized out there is based upon anomaly detection. And SOCs and SOC teams are utilizing various different technologies to identify when there's changes in behavior. That's a lot more difficult because the false positives are a lot higher, and people are now accessing all sorts of stuff late at night or during certain areas, which is not in line with the normal baseline. So it's very, very difficult to utilize that. And as a result, what's happened is that there's this gap, what we call the COVID gap, which is basically the increase in the attempt probability, also compared with a much lower probability to actually catch an attacker, or in this particular case, an insider. If we combine this with some statistics, which we've seen over the past few years, in 2008, the last time there was some type of financial crisis, there was a 73% increase in insider attacks, which if you've seen the statistics, you'll see that COVID, the financial situation is a lot worse than it was in 2008. So obviously that's going to have an impact. Also, even without the financial challenges, there was a huge increase in insider attacks, in the past year between 2018 to 2019. And if we look at two other factors, with the unemployment increasing as well as false positives, all of this sort of creates a perfect storm now for any type of insider threat challenges, and therefore organizations really need to start thinking about how they're tracking and how they're protecting against this type of incidents and this type of challenge. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to hand over to my colleague Paminda, who's going to talk through a specific example of two individuals in an organization and how potentially this could impact you moving forwards. Paminda, over to you.
Thank you, Ivan. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I wanted to take this opportunity to to discuss a couple of scenarios. One, a normal scenario where an organization doesn't take advantage of deception technology, and another scenario where an organization does. So here we have an employee called Steve. He's a loan processor. In the current climate, with the COVID situation, he's under pressure because of potential job losses. He's got personal, high debt. He's working from home. Right now, with the current situation, he's overwhelmed. So he's trying to do as much as possible to make sure that his job is safe. So, and the jobs are very hard to find. So in the situation that he is, he's become quite stressed in the situation that he's facing under the current circumstances. So that also applies to Ed, who's a SOC analyst, and he's actually now working from home as well. And typically, he would be working from the office, used to looking at large screens because he's a SOC analyst. Excuse me. And he's also, used to collaborating with his colleagues very quickly over a coffee in the corridor or whatever to look at an issue, to investigate an issue. But however, his work scenario, his work environment has now changed as well as a result of him working from home. He may have a simple laptop, not too much going on in terms of, what he sees or what he can see. So, sorry, just excuse me for the clicking here. So I've got a bit of a technical issue here. Bear with me, please. Okay, sorry about this. There's a bit of a lag on my connection. So going back to both employees, they're under stress for very, very different reasons. And so what we want to discuss today is how both these factors contribute to the current challenges that security teams are facing in financial organizations. And from a scenario perspective, so what we can do is walk through an example where Steve, right, he notices, right, that there are there's some information that exists on his computer. And now what it means is that, there are processes that involve, that helps Steve to become an insider threat person with basic knowledge, with basic information that he's actually able to see. And we will walk through the scenario and how, with and without the deception, the organization can actually take advantage of deception technology. So what we want to show is Steve discovers some credential data that is sitting on his computer in different places, right? Memory to start off with, different places. And he's an ordinary employee, and he had some technical issues on his laptop. An IT person conducted an IDP session to resolve his issue. But this IT person did not, however, shut down the IDP session properly or gracefully. So a lot of information relating to the IDP session remained on Steve's computer. So, and what Steve can do is actually able to identify some information that sits on his computer, and then he can take advantage of that, and he can actually say that this information that is sitting there has got some additional access that he can use to get hold of data that's normally not used to getting, not normally used to access that type of data. So he's actually now able to find out a little bit more what he can do, what he can't do, because he's got a high privilege access going on his computer. And now what we want to do is show you that how this process helps Steve to actually get get access to information that he normally doesn't get access to. So those credentials that Steve managed to get hold of allow him to access some data that he's normally not used to. So looking at file shares, for example. So he can see now that there's a file share that he can access, and it relates directly to his job, only at high privilege. Now, however, relating to his job, he would not be able to see this information under normal circumstances, but he can now choose to see, well, there are some information, and now he's not malicious. He's just curious. He's actually just looking at what is going on on the computer on his computer that he's using normally in normal circumstances, but with higher privilege access. And in doing so, he managed to search through the file share that he can see and is able to see, and he grabs a file called mortgage applications, and it's a complete access to the file share containing confidential data. So he can find this data, and what he's also able to do is download this data as well. Not only he's able to see the contents of the file share under the high privileged access that he's got now, but he's also able to download the content and view the contents of the file, as you can see. Now, let's take this scenario where deception technology is being utilized by the organization. So first and foremost, right, is that any privileged accounts that are seen on the on Steve's PC, on the entire organization host estate, any high privilege accounts that you can see that we detect are removed. So meaning that so these steps, what they allow you to do is look at the credentials that reside on the different computers, Steve's computer in this example, and there's a cached credential, high privilege. And what this should do, what the technology should allow you to do is remove these credentials so that they're not needed. Secondly, there may be some legitimate reasons why high privilege accounts are being utilized as well. So we can differentiate between the two. That somehow a process needs to be put in place so that required access and not so required access can be differentiated. So, so these high-level admin accounts needed to be removed. But at the same time, when they're removed, the technology, deception technology, should be able to find out the format of privileged access, usernames, resources that are on the network, and plant some deceptive data. So that when Steve uses what is an authentic looking admin account or high privilege account, he tries to use that, and because it's a deceptive user, now it's called domain admin 2. As soon as Steve tries to use that account, the deception because it's a deceptive piece of data, in the background, silent forensics need to be investigated or need to be collected, and subsequently helping the SOC team to investigate what is going on from Steve's PC, because he should not be able to access this type of data, and all the details that are behind Steve's activity needs to be recorded. So, but we can allow this process to carry on to the next step, right? So that next step could be getting the access to the file share as before. And within those file shares, again, there are some deceptive file shares that get planted, mimicking the real file shares as we saw in the previous example without deception technology. So that here you can see deceptive file shares have been planted, and also in addition to the file shares being planted as deceptive data, but the files can also be planted as well that look real, they look authentic, they mimic the real environment, so that as far as Steve's concerned, he will not be able to differentiate the difference between what a real file looks like or what the deceptive file looks like. So as far as he or she is concerned, or sorry, I should say Steve, he will not be able to differentiate between the two types of file, because only the only the administrator behind the technology, the deceptive technology, is able to differentiate between the two because of the forensic slated data that gets started to being collected. So we can, Steve can see the data, he can see the file, this file looks interesting to him, Northeast approved document that's got all the loan applications that have been approved. For him, it's an advantage because he can see what well, his colleagues are doing or not doing, so that he can take this information. And what normally would be the case, he will see that I've got access to information, but deep down it is deceptive type of document. And also because the document has been populated with some deceptive data, in other words, it's being beaconized. As soon as the file is opened, triggers are triggers are raised in the background so that the SOC team are made aware that the deception technology has been, the deceptive data that's been planted has now been used, has picked up these actions of Steve using deceptive data. This deceptive data is a combination of a name, a file share, and a document in this example. So in doing so, Steve opens a file. Again, for him, it looks a real authentic document, but it's beaconized, i.e. it's got some deceptive data. And in doing all these actions with the deception technology to the security teams that are monitoring the normal behavior, this comes across as normal behavior. Right, so your endpoint protection systems, your existing controls, your endpoint, for those type of controls that organizations have, this behavior by Steve looks normal, and because there's no malicious activity involved there. There's no malice in this Steve's action that he's performing, because he's appearing as a normal user looking at what appears to be normal resource access that he's doing when he's looking at file share or downloading and opening documents. But because they're deceptive and very hard to differentiate between the real data and what the deceptive data looks like. So in doing so, SOC team are made fully aware that Steve on this computer identify the full details of the computer, where Steve is, the location, the time, everything, and Steve did these actions, and then the file has been downloaded on Steve's PC. So therefore, the next actions that need to be performed by the security team, i.e. some sort of incident response, that can be triggered to make sure that these things do not happen again, or how Steve's PC can be captured to be quarantined or to be isolated as part of the security policy. So I'm going to hand back to you now, Ivan.
Brilliant, thanks, Parminder. So yeah, thanks very much for taking us through the use case. Obviously, what we want to do now is talk about Elusive and how Elusive and our technology can help prevent this type of scenario, and not only related to insider use cases, which is clearly what we talked about with Steve and Ed, but also talk about external or attackers who are trying to get onto customer networks. So when we look at what's gone over the past few months, and really this is a new world operations, and we use the terminology at Elusive around a 000 world. What we want to be able to do is provide our customers with the ability to operate in this type of world, and deliver three core capabilities. The first one is to enable you to make sure that zero privileged accounts are accessible to attackers. So before, when Parminder walked through the use case, he used the example of Steve. Steve was able to access privileged credentials, which Ed or an admin left behind on his machine, to be able to access information and data that he wouldn't ordinarily be able to do that, and what we want to be able to do is make sure that this type of incident doesn't happen in our customers' environments, because this could obviously be very, very difficult to protect against and cause all sorts of damage. The second thing that we want to, and second thing we want to be able to deliver to our customers is zero false positives. So we touched on it earlier when we talked about SOC teams and the difficulty of being a SOC analyst who's working remotely and having to deal with all of the incidents and challenges and not access to all the tools and the team that they would ordinarily have. So wouldn't it be fantastic as if you were a SOC analyst and the only alerts that you got were real alerts that you knew you needed to act on? And this is what we want to try and deliver to our customers. And the last thing is around wasted investigations. So making sure that there are none of these, and making sure that if you do have to spend time and energy with your incident response teams, that you're investigating stuff which results in actually real information and real action. So rather than wasting time on investigations which result in nothing and which were wasted. So we want to be able to deliver you and your customers. I'm talking to the partners, if there are partners on the call, we want to provide you with the ability to deliver a solution which provides all these three things. Now, the way that we do that with Elusive's software is divided into three different components. The first part is around shrinking the attack surface and therefore reducing the amounts of privileged credentials that may be resident on your network. And if we're able to do that and do that in an impactful way, we're going to make it much more difficult for an attacker to move across the network and access information and data that they're looking for. Combined with reduction in the attack surface, we then would like to expand the attack surface, but expand it using deceptive data. So make it really, really difficult for an attacker to know what's real and what's not. And lastly, what we want to be able to do is be able to give you the necessary information to act very, very quickly and to be able to deal with any type of incidents that are raised as a result of these type of activities. All of this is done, really, really quickly without having to install any type of agents on all of the machines, which we know a lot of our customers don't like to be able to manage and deal with agents. So how is this done in reality? The first part of, and this is a map or a view of a customer's network. What you are seeing here is the attack surface or the lens from a view of the attacker. You're seeing all of the little faces or end users, the computer screens essentially are servers, and the little crowns are what we will call our crown jewels. And what we are seeing across the board from all of the customers and all the reports coming out from an industry perspective is that when an attacker decides to land on a network, they're going to utilize all of these different credentials and connections to move from one machine to the next to make sure that they can they are not detected by your standard type of perimeter controls. So if I drill in and I give you an example here, we can see that from this particular machine, there are a number of different connections directly to the crown jewels. And these connections don't necessarily have to be there. So when I'm talking about connections that don't have to be there, I mean that they're there and resident because some users or some systems have basically left them cached either in memory or in the vault. And if an attacker is now able to access that particular machine, it makes it very, very easy for them to now move on to those various different crown jewels and access the data. So what we do at Elusive as part of our attack surface manager is we give you the capability to actually remove those connections on a constant basis. So provide regular cyber hygiene and create various different rules within your console, your Elusive console, to say, hey, I don't want domain admin user credentials on these type of machines, or I don't want RDP connections to be resident on these type of users' machines. And as a result of building these different violations or rules, you can then create a scenario where automatically these connections are cleaned on a regular basis, and the attack surface is therefore shrunk completely for any potential attacker. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part which we deliver is then deploying deceptions across this environment. And when I talk about deceptions could be in the form of usernames or passwords or various different types of credentials which exist on the network, but it also could be in the form of emulations. So machines that look like printers or routers or various different types of switches or network devices. And as a result, what it does is it moves us from a real scenario. If you go, this is the real network, after we've reduced the attack surface, to now expanding it so that to an attacker, they don't know what is real and what is not. And all the orange little dots that you see on the screen now actually represent fake data or fake connections or fake machines on the network, which are now going to tempt a potential attacker to access or use those different credentials to go through their various attack processes. And as a result of being able to deploy that on your environment in a very quick and easy way, it's going to now tempt an attacker into accessing the information. And we have seen that by deploying this type of capability in this type of environment, it can be super useful in being able to detect not only attackers, but also utilized in red team incidents or red team exercises that may be performed across your networks on a regular basis. And we're seeing from a lot of customers that these are run on either on a quarterly or on a every 6 months or so, to make sure that the systems they have in place are protecting their networks. And at Elusive, we've run about 100 of these different red team exercises where we've implemented Elusive, and then we've gone through this whole process, and we have been undefeated in over 100 red team exercises, which means that every single time a red team has tried to capture a flag and move from one part of the network to the other, we've been able to detect them. And there's a few logos which you'll see on your screen of companies that we've that have done this test, and every single time we've been able to detect them. So that's around the deceptions. Now, when a deception is triggered and an attacker or red team generates some type of alert or tries to utilize one of these credentials, what then happens is that we send an alert, and that alert could either go to the Elusive console, or it could generate alerts in the SIM if we've done integration with your third-party SIM solutions. Then what happens is that your incident response team is now able to have a look at all of the information and generate essentially an incident timeline, which can be very, very useful in understanding exactly what has happened on this particular machine, with a view to either investigating and looking what's going on, or to deciding to take action and remove that particular machine off the network. Okay. The other really interesting thing that we're able to do at this point is when an alert is triggered and forensics are run, we're not only can we do it for Elusive generated incidents, but we have the capability to run our on-demand forensics when any incident is generated. So we have a number of customers who use our very deep and rich forensic capability to pull off information and data when other systems generate alerts. So for example, if you've got an EDR, if you've got a large global organization and you've got a remote user, I guess today everyone's remote with COVID, but you've got a user which generates an alert, you're now able to utilize our on-demand forensics to get some incredible detailed information, and then make the decision on whether or not you want to allow that user to continue using that machine, or whether or not you want to cut it off the network and quarantine that particular machine. Okay, so that's the three different components to Elusive. we talked about the attack surface reduction, we talked about the deception, and we talked about the deep forensics, which can be very, very useful to our customers. What I'm now going to talk a little bit about is specific solutions for financial services organizations. The first one is around SWIFT, and SWIFT is the payment systems that I'm guessing the majority of you on the call would be familiar with. If you remember back in February 2016, there was the incident with the Bank of Bangladesh, where some attackers were able to get access to their SWIFT systems and transfer millions of dollars out of from the bank to some offshore accounts. What this exposed, I guess, was that these systems are not perfect, and if someone is able to access a SWIFT system very, very quickly and very easily, you could potentially transfer a lot of money. You don't have to dig a big hole and find a way to break into a bank. All you need is a way to compromise a user which has access to an organization's SWIFT payment system. So what we did on the back of this particular issue, we developed a specific solution to protect SWIFT environments, and we've got a specific example of SWIFT emulations or deceptions, where an attacker actually looks like they're interacting with a SWIFT system, and the second they try to utilize one of these different credentials that are not real, you'll get an alert and you'll know that your SWIFT system potentially may be compromised, or someone's trying to compromise your SWIFT system. So we've actually created something specifically for this, and a lot of our customers have been using this to protect their SWIFT environments. The second specific solution which we've developed for financial organizations is to protect mainframe environments. And we know, these very, very large machines, which generally are run on legacy systems, really, really difficult to protect against, because you don't want to run specific software or security software on them, and very, very difficult to update and monitor. And exactly the same way as I touched on with the SWIFT, we actually created a fake mainframe environment. So we have the ability to deploy deceptions which look like real mainframes. You don't actually have to have any mainframes in your environment to deploy our deceptions. Obviously, if you do have, then it makes it a lot more relevant. But the concept here is that an attacker looks like they're accessing, and it even looks like it's a screen of a mainframe. And if they try to interact with these deceptive mainframe environments, you would get an alert and you would know that someone's doing something that they shouldn't. Okay, so those are two specific deception families that we've developed to help with financial organizations. The other thing which is super interesting to consider when we talk about financial organizations, and two different initiatives. One, for those of you aware, the Bank of England has a specific organization which works to make sure that their security is always up to speed, and that is CBEST. What CBEST is a particular organization which runs regular penetration tests to financial organizations in the UK as part of the Bank of England, and every single time CBEST runs some type of attack or some type of pen test, they will then produce a report to all of the organizations which it runs on, and we know for a fact from hearing a lot of customers that lateral movement seems to come up every time a CBEST audit takes place, and with Elusive in place, you'll be able to come up a lot better against these type of audits. There's documents here, and we can share with any of you around this particular document. The other thing which I know for European organizations is always a concern is around GDPR and being able to make sure that you can protect the data for your customers and on your network. And by utilizing deception, we also believe in and can show how we can help protect against GDPR, and we've got a specific document which also relates to that. Lastly, what I wanted to cover with you before I open up to any questions is 2 specific customer examples, and talk a little bit about exactly what their issues were and why they decided to implement Elusive. The first one is a large European bank, which we worked with for a number of years. Their main challenge, or their main reason for talking to us at Elusive, was around red teams and penetration tests. What happens is that it's in this particular organization, at any point in time, a red team incident or red team exercise could take place across any of their large sites around the world. And as a result, they found that every single time a red team exercise took place, the red team were able to move, were able to access information, and the SOC team weren't able to pick up on their movements. And what they wanted to do is ensure that that the defenders, or that the blue team, actually won for once. Okay, they were very embarrassed around this, that every single time they used both internal and external red teams, it was quite embarrassing, and they couldn't detect them. So they came to us. We did a detailed evaluation, looked at how we could help them, working with their threat hunting team, integrating with their SIM platforms, all sorts of stuff that we did. And now we're deploying across to the first phase of their organization, and we're very, very happy to report that we've been able to identify and alert on all of the red teams that have run since we've implemented Elusive in their environment. So they are very happy with us, and we're now in the process of expanding across additional countries, and expecting to be able to deploy across the entire bank and across their very, very large global footprint. So that is that example. The second example, which is a very large bank in the UK, I talked a little bit earlier around SWIFT and the Bangladeshi bank incident, which caused a lot of banks or a lot of financial organizations to think about how they could protect and their environments and make sure that they weren't on the front page of the newspapers the following days or the following weeks, having potentially being exposed or potentially being infiltrated by some type of attackers using their SWIFT systems. So with this particular example, this bank read the articles or heard all of the news around Bangladeshi bank. They looked to us to help them address the specific use case for SWIFT and to be able to protect their SWIFT users, or the users who had access to the SWIFT systems. We initially deployed to a few thousand users who access their SWIFT systems. They were very, very happy with the results and what we were able to achieve. They then decided to expand beyond SWIFT to cover what they call their crown jewels, so their critical assets, their important servers and their VIP users across the network. But after a few months, they actually were so impressed with what we were able to deliver, and also feedback from the internal regulators in terms of the protection that they put in place, that they decided to actually implement and roll it out to the entire estate, which is over 150,000 machines across their network. So you know, that's fantastic for us, and a really, really happy customer who's actually able to talk to additional potential customers around how they did that. What we are now doing with them, interestingly, is we're not stopping there. So we're not stopping and just protecting their, you know, all of their machines. They're actually in the process now of rolling out what's called Microsoft managed desktop to a lot of their Windows 10 devices, and we are actually integrating very, very closely with Microsoft to be able to deliver this additional capability, which gives protection not only within the network but also to various different cloud capabilities. And they're also now looking to expand the use of Elusive to cover IoT devices, network devices. So I touched on earlier when I talked about mainframes and Swift environments that we create emulations which look like real environments. We also now have the capability to be able to do similar type of emulations for IoT devices and network devices, so switches, routers, IP cameras, all sorts of other things which potentially attackers could access, and they're seriously looking at that and potentially expanding deceptions to be able to cover that as well. So those are two real live use cases. Hopefully this webinar has been interesting for a lot of you, and I'm going to now hand back to Jason.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you to Parminder earlier for this presentation. So just before I make some of these announcements, this will be the time now for Q&A. I know a couple of questions have already come in, but you can ask questions in the Q&A tab on the webinar control panel. After today's webinar, there are a few things that you can do to find out more information about how deception technology can help your organization. One is, if you want a full product demo, you can go to elusivenetworks.com/demo, and one of our security experts can show you how we can help meet your security challenges. Previous webinars, white papers, and the like are on our resources page, elusivenetworks.com/resources. You can also check out our blog at the link on the screen. We write a lot about deception, attack surface management, forensics, but more broadly on cybersecurity incidents in general and various topics, as well as you can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at elusivnw, excuse me, and on LinkedIn at the link above. So we'll take a couple of questions. So one question that somebody asked earlier was, when we talk about deception, an elusive approach, is it basically like a honeypot approach, or if it's different? So Ivan, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jason. So in terms of comparing us with the honeypots, I always use the analogy that we're not a honeypot. We're more of a honey glaze. So consider a honeypot is a technology which has been used, I guess, for the past 20 or 25 years in security. And the concept there is, let's install a machine somewhere on the network, and let's entice an attacker to land on that machine and then learn loads about what they're doing and where they're trying to go. What our solution does, and where we differ to a honeypot, is that our concept is take the honey out the pot and spread it all over the network. And the concept here is deception in depth, or distributed deception. And what our premise is that we want to try and catch an attacker when they're very, very far from the crown jewels. And where a honeypot, if you're able to identify that someone's landed on a honeypot, a lot of the time this may be too late, because generally you would put a honeypot close to your crown jewels. So we do have the capabilities of installing honeypots. We have decoys as part of our arsenal at Elusive. And if you are looking for threat research and you do want to install an image of your type of machines and have a real life honeypot, we have the capability of doing that. But at Elusive, it's more about distributed deceptions across your entire network to catch attackers early before they cause major problems in your network.
Great, thank you. We also had a question before about who is the main person within an organization that typically you've seen uses Elusive?
Great. I mean, I think the main, it depends on the size of organization that you're dealing with. In our very, very large customers, I would say the main user of Elusive is probably the the head of the SOC, or the level 2 or level 3 SOC engineers. They are the ones who are really looking at the elusive incidents, and being able to take action based upon the information and the data that's provided to them. I would maybe add a caveat that to say that that's definitely relevant for the deception as well as the forensic element to the service. But if you look at the attack surface manager, the user would probably be the AD teams, or the people who deal with privileged access management, to make sure that cyber hygiene is effective and that people don't have access to the privileges which they wouldn't ordinarily have. So maybe twofold answer. AD teams, or people who deal with privileged access management, would deal with the attack surface manager, and from a deception or detection as well as incident response component to our solution, that would be looked after by the SOC team.
Thank you. Another question was, we have a pretty complex environment, both on-premise and in the cloud. So can you talk about just your deployment capabilities, where they can be, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So we haven't necessarily gone into too much technical detail on this webinar to talk about how it's deployed and where we would deploy and all sorts of scenarios. And I'd love to schedule follow-up calls or demos with any of you to go into a little bit more detail. But at a very, very high level, Elusive can be deployed on-prem or in cloud environments. In actual fact, one of our reference customers in the UK, a company called Oak North Bank, has actually got a full cloud environment. All of their servers are all in the cloud, and they use our service actually deployed on virtual machines in cloud. So we can work with cloud environments, with hybrid environments, with on-prem environments, as long as we have the ability to deploy our software, our solution to the different machines, and there's a mechanism to be able to do that, then we should be able to work without any problems.
Okay, great. A couple other questions. Somebody was asking about if there's a possibility of getting in a risk assessment specifically related to Swift.
Yeah, so in terms of a risk assessments, we run what's called an attacks risk assessment, and we actually can come in, either remotely or physically, as and when we have the capabilities to do that, and set up our environment and actually create a report for you, which shows you all of the different systems that potentially are at risk. If you would want to get the specific to Swift, then that's not a problem. What we just need to make sure is that we configure Swift as a crown jewel before we run this the tool. And if we create a policy which specifically calls out Swift, then we could definitely run this type of assessment for you and actually show you exactly what Swift environment, or what the situation is with your Swift environment. So the answer is yes, no problem.
Okay, then there was one more that I saw that it's a pretty detailed question. That's kind of a lot of questions within it, but let me just break it down a little bit. One of which was, can you talk about just the general protecting Active Directory? And also separately, can you talk about briefly about hiding real credentials and system data from the attacker?
Yeah, I don't know, Parminder, do you want to maybe go in and talk about Active Directory specifically?
Yes, thank you, Ivan. So in terms of Active Directory, first of all, Elusive platform only needs to read the contents of the AD itself. And what we do is we look at accounts that are disabled, inactive, as well as any accounts that you wish to have planted as deceptive. by the platform, which get rolled out to the network. So those are the different combinations of Active Directory accounts that we use to deploy as deceptive data. So the point being is that these deceptive data, these deceptive users should not being used because one, they're disabled or they're inactive, or you actually as part of the Active Directory team have told Elusive to monitor certain Active Directory accounts because they're live accounts, they are an active account, they're active accounts purely used for monitoring purposes. The goal is to make sure that these certain users are not used, or if they are used, tell me about it so I can monitor and protect my Active Directory domain name, my domain. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Any other questions, Jason, or to wrap up?
No, I think that's it. So just a couple of reminders, people. Firstly, the webinar today has been recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording in your inbox. On the screen, you can see just, again, the links, but I'm not going to go through every single one, but just specifically if you want to request a demo to find out more information and how we can help you overcome your specific security challenges, go to elusivenetworks.com/demo. Thank you so much to our presenters today, Ivan and Parminder. We hope that you and your family remain healthy and have a great rest of the day.